Thank you.
Sorry, I just started.
No worries. Thank you. And yes, if you could just download the chat within the last 5 minutes, that would be amazing.
Of course.
All right. And we're still waiting for my colleague Linda, but I can just start with a quick introduction. Right now, you're all unable to unmute yourselves. What we're going to do is we're going to do a quick presentation going through kind of the changes of the routes, and then we will launch into our Q&A. We can bring up our remix map and we can talk more through the details of the routes, but the goal of this is really for all of you to leave here feeling like you understand our changes and you have communicated what you want to tell us. At any time, you can message in the chat if you're having difficulties. And I also know that to raise your hand within the Q&A portion on a phone, if you're on a cell phone, you need to do *9 to raise your hand, which can be kind of complicated. So we are still waiting for my colleague Linda to appear. However, while we are in this waiting period, if you could all message maybe your region or whatever bus you're interested in the chat, just for our records, that would be amazing. Additionally, while we're waiting for some people to self-select, I will put our key links right here in our main project page. And Carl, just a logistics thing, are you getting these messages or am I? Because in that case, I will have to download.
I'm getting the chat as well, so I'll be sure to download it.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, everyone, please give me a minute. I'm just going to reach out to could someone
Also, if you're posting the line or area that you're from, feel free to post it in the general chat and not just to me.
Mm-hmm. Linda, I believe you're muted.
Unmute.
Welcome. Wonderful.
Hello, finally here.
All right. So everyone, my name is Marley Bellinger. Again, I was one of the lead community liaisons for this project. I've been focusing on our feedback and collection and making sure we really hear from you. And I'm here with my colleague Linda to present. So I'll leave her to introduce herself. But again, at any time, just to confirm, as I got a question in the chat, this is the group for Avon, Braintree, Brockton, Canton, Dedham, Hingham, Holbrook, Hull, Milton, Norwood, Quincy, Randolph, Walpole, Westwood, and Weymouth. And therefore, if you feel like you're in the wrong spot, please feel free to leave back into the main room and we can resort you. All right. So without further ado, I will let Linda introduce herself and we can launch right into the main meeting.
Hello, my name is Linda Lally and I work in the service office for planning and scheduling at the MBTA. As we have heard earlier, the changes that were made to the draft map, there were 85 of the 133 proposed routes were changed. So changes include routing, restoration of existing routes, addition or subtraction of routes, extensions of routes, and modifications to frequency and span of service. Can you move the?
Certainly.
Thank you. Right, okay. This is a brief summary of the changes. I know those other lists were so long, even I was getting lost in them. No change since the May proposal. Route 24, T28, T31, 35, 36, 40, 50, 217, the 220, the 222, 714, and 716.
And if I may, that no change since May proposal can be confusing to some of you who haven't seen the May proposal or haven't been following the project. And me and Linda would be happy to talk you through exactly what that means for your route. So if you see this and you're worried, do not worry, we can go through it. That's why we're here. Sorry, Linda.
Okay, there were some routes where we changed the frequency or the span was adjusted. In other words, it would come more often and stay open later. That was the 30, the 25, the 26, and the 216. And those changes were based on comments from riders saying they needed to get home at a later hour and they wanted the service to continue. We had one route, the 211, that was extended, and that was because the city came to us and told us that they had some new job opportunities off of the 211, and if we could modify the route a little bit, we could provide more transportation for people to get to those jobs. The next category is rerouting to better serve medical facilities, senior housing, and other destinations, or again, at the request of municipalities, and 34 was the route that was affected. Restored to existing route with occasional frequency and span adjustments. That was most of Quincy, actually, from the where's the lowest one? 210, 215, 236, 238, 240. A lot of feedback came in about the changes in the routing of these Quincy and further away routes. And so we went back to the original route as it was before the COVID. And we, at the same time, tried to make some frequency and adjustments to these routes as they are. Some of them are very busy. Also, the 34E, we made changes to. Next slide. Thank you so much. Okay. The first one we can talk about is bus route 29, and I'm assuming they can they talk to us probably whenever they want?
So we're going to go through the high level and then we can come back and talk about the 29 in details. We're just going to give them the details first and then do questions and answer after.
Right. So originally we planned to go from Jackson Square to Mattapan via Blue Hill Avenue. However, we heard that we would be missing some of the senior housings in Franklin Field. So we've gone back to starting Mattapan, going up Blue Hill Avenue, taking a little jog out there to the senior housing, and then ending at Jackson Square, where of course you can pick up the orange line. That was 29. Okay, next.
And just to reiterate, this one was restoring the existing route. So there's no change to that route on the right that you see based on today.
Right. For Route 34, this is a major change in rerouting the route. Originally, today it goes up Route 1 and then Washington Street, and the proposal or the decision, the revised bus network is going to go strictly on Washington Street, all the way to Forest Hills. There's another route, 34E, that goes from Forest Hills to Walpole, and it's going to go on Washington Street also. So different arrangements have to be made to get to the Dedham Mall if that's your destination on this route. Okay.
And specifically the Dedham Mall, for service to Dedham Mall, you're going to transfer to Route 24 or 35. Both transfers happen within Dedham.
211.
34E is next. We changed some of the order.
Sorry, we did. Once again, it was going, it took Route 1, and now it's on Washington Street. And instead of making the jog out to the senior housing, as you can see here. It's turned from a darker brown line, the little hook there in the middle of the screen, to a light brown one, so that you can see it's not going to stop in at the housing authority on its way to Walpole.
That
Very
would be the legacy is the thing,
Oh,
the dark
sorry.
brown.
right. Legacy Place.
So 34E is no longer going to legacy, but that is still satisfied by the Route 34, which continues to go into legacy. But another thing about the 34E is we extended service to 1 a.m. And we also have that frequency, 30 minutes or better, during the weekdays. So I know that was a conversation to be had that we can go over as well.
Right, okay. The 211, which goes to Squantum from Quincy Center, is going to have a slight diversion. You can see there the blue line, and that is going into Marina Bay. The idea is to provide service for people working at FedEx or Boston Scientific. And of course, other venues can be walked to from the route. It's on Victory Road. It's going to be a straight route. And we are at this moment working with the city to make it more accessible to the businesses around it by putting in sidewalks and rights of way, and also making the stop accessible, possibly putting in a shelter. But we are working with the city to make it a good place to go. Okay. Route 215, we had proposed that it go a lot further than it is, and so we have reverted back to its original assignment. We're not going to attempt to take it all the way up to Fields Corner anymore.
And 210 is the route that you can see for the Fields Corner connection.
Yep. Okay. 230. We had proposed that we, instead of stopping in Braintree, go all the way to Quincy Center.
And that was the proposal.
Yeah.
That was what ended up being the reality. in the
Yes.
fall.
Okay. So, yeah.
Additionally, with the 230, we extended service to 12 a.m. So it runs a little bit later than it would normally, and you're getting all the way up to Quincy Center.
Okay. Bus routes 236 and 237. Well, the 237 was a newly introduced route. However, it was, it called for two things. It called for the rerouting of the 236 away from the St. Moritz off part of town. And the 237 was going to be more service to the mall. But the pushback was to please leave the 236 the way it was. So we've gone back to its original, and the 237 is off the menu. We won't have it at all. We won't be introducing it at all.
Mm-hmm. We have restored the existing 236 service to South Shore Plaza. So this looks more like today, and
Yep.
therefore you can still connect into South Shore Plaza on the 236.
Yep. The 238 is the Holbrook Randolph station to Quincy Adams. We had proposed a more direct route, and that was not favored by a lot of people who contacted us. So we are actually going to increase it a little bit more and go over to the commuter rail station.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, for 34E, I have that next, but we already went through that.
240. Yep.
240. 240. What we wanted to do with that was to continue the existing route all the way down to Avon for every run. But we have received a lot of comment about that and decided to revert back to the every other trip going to Avon instead of every trip.
But we also extended service to 1 a.m. on this
Yep.
route.
Mhm.
Okay.
Now,
This is the 210.
oh, now we're doing the 210.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry. I never put them in order. Okay, Quincy Center to Fields Corner via North Quincy. We listened to the feedback and we decided that we would have a straighter run instead of the curved run over to Ashmont. So it's going to continue to go from Quincy Center to Fields Corner via North Quincy. And that was the original, that is in existence today.
Mhm.
There's no change to the 210.
Perfect. All right, and that now concludes our presentation. We're going to move into question and answer to kind of clarify some of these routes for you. I just want to keep this up really briefly. In order to speak and be unmuted, you first have to raise your hand. You'll see a little raise hand button that's yellow in the center of your screen, or it will be under reactions. If you're on a phone, you have to dial *9 in order to raise your hand. If you have any problems with this, you can also message us in the chat or message Carl directly, and we can unmute you like that. All right, with that, I'm going to stop my share and we can kick it off. Clark, hello.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have a general comment about the whole Better Bus project. The biggest problem writing the MBTA is connections.
Mhm.
And there's no objective about making connections better. The worst possible scenario is riding the red line to Quincy and then finding that the 220 bus is just left on an evening when it's only hourly service. And that issue needs to be addressed. I think a lot of ridership is lost because there are no good connections, particularly between rapid transit and bus and also bus to bus. The 714 to 220, I just happened to ride that the other day and then came back, and the connection was like 35 minutes in one direction. And one service runs hourly, the other runs irregularly. And then the connection coming back was about 20 minutes, long enough for me to go to the post office. But that's not how connection should really work. I think that you need to have computerized dispatching, but you need to really work on connections. And also 714 doesn't collect fares in the normal way. I can't use a trolley card. So to make a trip from Weymouth to West Corner, that's 2 fares. And that's unfair. And so the other thing is, I mentioned before that the 222 route should be extended to Derby Street, because a lot of people use those bus routes only for employment, particularly lower income workers. And there's a lot of jobs at Derby Street, and there are other people walking down Route 53 or whatever it is, Whiting Street, where there's no sidewalks because they have jobs at Linden Pond. So these major areas are not served. And finally, South Shore Hospital is not served. And anybody living on the South Shore would have to go, if they could get there at all, would have to go to Quincy or some other place like that. And finally, in the summer, we need a beach bus, get some of the cars off the road. So, and so I think that we have been shortchanged in the South Shore. There's no new service being added. There's major corridors that were served by streetcar that now have nothing. That particularly the South Shore Hospital to Hull. And there's I was hoping that, and I don't agree with the 25%. I think that's an arbitrary number. You should be looking at effectiveness, and if the changes are really effective, you should be able to be prepared to add more than 25% to the service, and rather just saying we're going to have some fixed number and then go fish. So I hope that the MBTA could change this from some passive exercise to something that's oriented to objectives that could be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Clark.
Responses.
If I may respond, So that is the point or the goal of bus network redesign at its form, is providing better connections to better places. So I think you even mentioned the 220, that is now 7 days per week, 30 minutes or better. So we really looked at our ridership and which buses were getting the most ridership, and you'll see this bus network redesign is consisted of more high frequency corridors. So that is throughout the entire Boston network, including the South Shore. We now have buses that are identified coming 15 minutes or better 7 days a week until 1 a.m. So we're really trying to focus on improving those connections, but also I appreciate you highlighting, where you think we need more service. But I can assure you, that's an entire goal of this project. But I don't know, Linda, if you have any responses, but thank you for your comments, Clark.
Well, the 226 does go to the hospital, serves Columbian. And maybe your problem is it starts from Braintree instead of Quincy Center. I'm not sure. But the 226, every year, we've been trying to add more and more service down to the hospital in particular. Although the ridership's not there, we understand that it's a destination that people need. And if we put in more service, it'll probably be ridden more, kind of thing. Okay.
And I would just ask, we're going to try to keep comments at 2 minutes because I know we have the 7:20 cutoff, and then we can also revisit Clark after as well. So we're going to go Owen first, and then Betty's on deck.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. There was a very small change made in the routing of bus route 222. Currently, what it does, coming toward Quincy up North Street, turns left on C Street and joins Route 3A at the intersection of C and Route 3A. The proposal here, and we commented on this earlier, was to run all the way up to North Street and turn left on 3A at North Street. We had requested that the C Street be continued. We understand that the routing is such that 222 and 220 are combined such that there will be 15 minutes service from along that part of Bridge Street in Weymouth and Washington Street in Quincy, but I don't believe this would affect it by doing that, by making that small, by leaving it as existing, in other words, to keep that there. And it is taking service away from some folks who pick it up on C Street. And just as another point of note, as part of the our Complete Streets project in Weymouth, our plan is to install a bus shelter on C Street near the post office where people could get on. And we actually have funding for that. And it's actually been, the pad for it has actually been placed at this time. So that's one point we are concerned about. There were a couple of other changes we'd requested in routing, but this is the one we're really concerned about.
You're in the planning office, right, Owen? In City Hall?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
We can talk about that offline. All right. I'll contact you next week.
Okay.
Thanks for calling in. Thank you.
And again, for everybody, I do want to clarify that bus network redesign doesn't happen overnight. It's a 5-year process. So sometimes, again, this is the plan. We're going to stick to this as dutifully as possible. But if some little wiggles maybe need to shift, in the 5-year span, even just logistics, they might. So again, this is our plan. We're sticking to this as much as possible, but it's a 5-year process. So I did want to kind of underline that for people. It's going to be implemented incrementally throughout those 5 years. Okay, thank you, Owen. Betty, can we hear from you next?
Hi, thank you so much for this meeting and this presentation. Just wanted to offer a suggestion in light of the fact that this is a kind of a draft in process of the bus network changes to come. What if there was connectivity between, I actually kind of sketched this out, between 34E, that Walpole bus line, to Route 28, which is an Amtrak and commuter rail line station that doesn't really get any bus connections. People have to drive there. I've driven there myself. To 716 through to Houghton's Pond, however you pronounce that destination, Route 240 and 238. Basically, just drawing a line from the 34E line to all the way to Quincy Adams, or even further east to Hingham, just to again connect all these bus lines. One bus line to connect all these bus lines, and also to run along the Blue Hills Reservation and the Yankee Division Parkway. I was looking at the bus routes leading into the South Shore and noticed that a lot of them were kind of like, spokes on a wheel leading out from city centers like Quincy Center and Quincy Adams. And I think it would probably be not just a boost to ridership, to be able to make connections away from city centers. But, given that my proposal would run along the south of the Blue Hills Reservation, it would also be really nice in the summertime, really nice in the fall for recreational purposes. So I mapped it out on Google Maps if anybody wants to see that. So I can drop my email in the chat.
Sure. Thank you very much, Betty.
Thank you.
I will just briefly respond that a big point of bus network redesign is we're trying to make our routes as narrow, direct, straight, and frequent as we can. We'll definitely take that comment back, so I really appreciate you bringing it up. But one thing that we did was we did a lot of internal outreach with our bus operators to make sure they have, access to bathrooms at both ends. They're not driving too long. So we'd have to look at, that route. But just generally, the purpose of this meeting is also to share our draft map. We got our 20,000 comments and we changed almost 60% of the routes based on the public comments like that. But again, thank you very much. But this is the current plan. But again, thank you. We really want to hear the public's comments in general. Sebastian?
Thank you, Marley. So in regards to the 238, right? Since the 230 is already being in like the initial system, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was initially in support of the change for the 238, but with the addition of that the return to service for what is already exists,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't it just be better just to have that continual route to go back to Quincy Center instead of cutting off at Quincy Adams? Because by having that original proposal in May, it gave a more faster service for 230 and it made sense to have the connection towards Quincy Adams. But with the addition of the returning section, we'll just be able to directly connect to Quincy Center, and therefore just have the connection at all the other major bus routes in Quincy. And the other thing I want to also ask is in regards to the Crawford Square and Randolph Holbrook terminal. Will that section be consistent to just going towards the Randolph Holbrook commuter rail station? Because Crawford Square is always serviced by the 238, and so by having it terminate at Crawford Square, you basically cut service off to Randolph Holbrook however many times during the day, and it cuts that connection from the commuter rail. So I just wanted to see if there's a guarantee, if that will remain consistency, that the 238 will always terminate at Randolph Holbrook rather than cutting short at Crawford Square.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sebastian. I can definitely take part of the first one, and then I'd defer to Linda on the second one. The 238 was actually part of a package of changes. So part of the bus network redesign is we're increasing service by 25%, but we don't actually use more buses to do that. So unfortunately, we did have to kind of make cuts. We would agree, we want to try to make sure we provide those, direct services to everyone. But I think that was the package of changes that, because we restored that service back, we kind of reverted it to pre-proposal. That was why we didn't have that other connection that you mentioned. So I could kind of, to elaborate the logic behind that. But we also, within bus network redesign, really just wanted to prevent any redundancies in the routes, which is why you saw kind of the merge. Here, I can pull it up again for people who want the reference. Hang on. Let me share my screen. Which is why you saw you saw this change also because we were missing people within this loop, excuse me. So it wasn't so much what the tail was doing connecting in, but it was more this loop, this residential area was no longer serviced. And then Linda, I don't know if you had a response to the second question, or if we can ask to unmute him briefly, but the second question was about the Crawford Square connection.
Well, we have the 240 that does the Crawford Square in addition to the 238. What was your problem with that?
My problem is that because the 238 already presently services Crawford Square, I just want to make sure if there's a guarantee that the service continues to go all the way towards the commuter rail station in Randolph Holbrook, because like that's there's a one stop, right? Oh, right. If you see at the end of Randolph, right, and that little hook.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, right. That for Crawford Square, when it goes to only Crawford Square, that hook is basically not serviced.
Yeah, we restored a lot of the streets that were supposed to be left out, and we extended the service to 11 p.m. But as far as I know, we aren't making every trip into the commuter rail. I think we probably have to look at it and see how many connections there can be between the bus and the commuter rail. But as Marley said, as we progress and we get to making more and better schedules for each of these routes, that's something that we can consider to make sure that the bus and the first man who spoke too, who asked that we have connections, meaning the bus gets to the commuter rail station when the commuter rail gets there. So we'll be looking at that as we progress into making schedules for this service.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. And also just to echo, this, again, because of the 5-year implementation period and the fact that we're increasing frequency on so many of these buses, exactly as Linda said, like the goal is to provide those easier transfers. If we ask somebody to take a 2-seat ride, we're not going to make that harder than a 1-seat, so this is something that we're very sensitive to, and this is the opportunity of bus network redesign to maybe patch some of those messy connections that already exist in our network. Yanxi, excuse me, please feel free, and Simon's on deck.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify this meeting, this breakout room covers Dedham, Westwood, Norwood as well, right?
Indeed.
Okay, so I wanted to comment on 2 things. One is the frequency, the proposed frequency of the 34 and 34E bus routes going into Dedham and Norwood and Westwood. Basically, currently, if you look at the, today, the weekday schedule, it's about 15-minute combined frequency on the 2 routes. And it's, it is a 15-minute frequency because that has been changed in recent years. And so the issue is then under the proposal, there seems to be a decrease in service to roughly 60 minutes for the 34E and 30 minutes for the 34, which would bring to about a 20-minute frequency. And that's a bit concerning, especially in light of the fact that the MBTA is under this proposal, committing to 20-minute frequencies on routes like the 216, the 95, and so forth. Given the extensive ridership of the 34 and 34E, especially along the section of Washington Street between Rosendale Square and Dedham Mall, I think that really deserves, especially in comparison to routes like the 216. I think that, more service is warranted to the point of potentially even making it one of the blue routes. And then the other is a related point with regard to the connection into Dedham Mall, which was eliminated between the original proposal and the current proposal. And obviously, and then obviously the issue there is if somebody wanted to get from the 34, that section of Washington Street between Rosendale and where the 34 meets the 35 at Stimson Street, then that's sort of an issue, because going from Washington, the nearest stop on Washington Street into, for example, the Stop and Shop in Dedham Mall is a 10-minute walk. It's it's down a pretty steep automotive car-oriented ramp, pretty much impassable in the winter. And so that is something that, obviously the decimal deviation adds a lot of time, but that's something to consider as well in terms of, is it realistic to ask riders to transfer to the 35 when the 34 is being reduced in frequency? And obviously there's a little bit of additional service on the 35, but the 35 already runs every 15 minutes during the afternoon peak today. And, so it's already, going back to some of the points you mentioned earlier. So basically, again, 34E frequency, and then decimal 34.
Sure. I'm going to answer that in one sec, but just real quick, I think we're going to close soon. So Simon, feel free to either throw your question in the chat or we'll try to get to you soon. But I'm actually really happy to report that we actually heard a lot of 34E riders within the bus network redesign process. And now within the fall proposal, actually, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, it is back to that 30 minutes or better, but it's not 7 days a week. It's 30 minutes or better 5 days a week, but we thought that was a good compromise because we heard so many people call for the 34E to be back to that high frequency or higher frequency. But like you mentioned, it combines with the 34, and that is also going to be 30 minutes or better the 7 days a week. I can read the exact, so the 34E is 30 minutes or better, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays. And then that is the 7 days per week service. And then the 34 also has the 30 minutes or better. There's some fluctuations. So if I can show you right on this screen, these are our projections. It's not set in stone yet for the 34E routing. So as you can see on a weekday, it's give or take every 25 minutes during the peaks. There's that 50-minute gap here. But again, the peaks are going to be those higher frequency. And then Saturday and Sunday, it is the reduced frequency, 50 minutes. But again, I don't expect it to be nearing the 90, but that is something that I'm not too versed on and can't really speak to myself. The transfer to the 35, thank you for flagging. I know that we had discussions, they're escaping my mind, about that transfer. But just to zoom in to where you mentioned that Stop and Shop transfer is right here. So this is the 35, as you mentioned, and then the 34 transfer that came up. It is here. So again, that's something that we can look at, and thank you for flagging that. Linda, I don't know if you had any comments on that, or if not, we can.
Perfectly, thank you. Yes,
Perfect.
we are still looking at it.
Perfect. And Simon? Nope.
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to, I saw that there's already someone from Lincoln Heights in the chat, but I just also wanted to speak up and express my concern that the 238 stop on Center Street, which is like right in front of Lincoln Heights, is going to be removed. That would have a big impact to my commute. Yeah, and the fact that there isn't a replacement stop within half a mile is also kind of concerning to me, especially because obviously there's a lot of residents here who depend on that route.
We restored the existing Center Street, West Street, Willard Street, and Granite Street service.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. It's
And
back.
let me just show you so you can be assured. So this is our, we heard a lot of the same things, and really everyone, I wanted to stress, we changed 60% of the routes because of people like you speaking up. So we heard that loud and clear. So now that is restored because we didn't want to have people walk that far, and that's part of our main design principle, is reducing the walk distance between stops. So that was I'm happy to report we restored that. All right. Do we have any additional comments? I know that they were supposed to kick us out by now, but I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So Clark?
Fraser's back.
Yeah, I'm back. I just wanted to respond to what you said before about South Shore Hospital. It's not possible for anyone from Weymouth, Hingham, or Hull to really get there by transit, because you have to go to either Quincy or Braintree or some other place. So I suggested that there be a route from Braintree to Hull via South Shore Hospital and maybe some other places in Weymouth, because there's no service in the southern part of the region here. And that's main comment. And the other is you need to have regular interval schedules that are compatible so that if the red line runs every 15 minutes and the bus should connect on the hour, whatever, with 1 and 4 trips, not having the red line running 13 minutes and you never know whether or not you're going to be able to connect with the bus. That's the problem. So that's something that I don't see anywhere in your documentation that you're going to fix that. And if you need technical help with that, I'm available to give you some suggestions of how to make the bus lines work that way and not use too many extra buses.
Thank you very much, Clark. Carl, if you could save the chat now, that would be great. And I just wanted to thank you all for attending this session. We're going to go put back into breakout room. So please feel free to ask more questions if we haven't answered them. But again, just wanted to emphasize, thank you very much for coming. And it's people like you that really helped us shape this network. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.